Good morning. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Lauren Ashburn of EWTN News. I want to welcome you here this morning for a discussion of the 2019 annual report of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, also known as USCIRF. USCIRF was created in 1998 by the International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. This is USCIRF's 20th annual report. Acronyms here on Capitol Hill run rampant. The report, which covers calendar year 2018, contains USCIRF's findings and policy recommendations to the U.S. government. We have 8 USCIRF commissioners here today to discuss the report. Their full bios are available on the tables, but I'd like to briefly introduce them. Our Commissioner, Tenzin Dorji, is the current U.S. Chair. Then House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, now Speaker Pelosi, appointed him in 2016 and reappointed him in 2018. Vice Chair Christina Arriaga, House Paul Ryan, House Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, appointed her in 2016 and reappointed her in 2018. Vice Chair Gail Manchin, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer appointed her in May of 2018. Gary Bauer, President Donald Trump appointed him in May of 2018. Anurima Bhargava, then Minority Leader Pelosi, appointed Commissioner Bhargava in December 2018. Nadine Mayenza, President Trump appointed Nadine in May of 2018, as did Johnny Moore. President Trump appointed him in May of 2018. 8th Commissioner is Tony Perkins. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell appointed Commissioner Perkins in May of 2018, and Commissioner Andy Kawaja was appointed by Leader Schumer, could not be here and sends his regrets. Before we begin, please shut off your cell phones. This session is on the record and is being taped and live streamed. We'll start with a welcome from Senator Joe Manchin. We're also expecting brief remarks from Representative Jim McGovern and Mark Meadows. The Vice Chair and Chair, 2 Vice Chairs, will discuss the report, and then I will take advantage of my position as moderator to ask several questions of the Commissioner. After that, we will wrap up for questions from the audience. And when you ask a question, please wait for a microphone, identify who you are, your organization, and ask a direct question to someone if possible. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Joe Manchin.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate very much being here, and I'd like to thank our chair, Tenzin Dorji, to all the staff, and make this happen to all of you who serve. Thank you for what you do every day. Also to Vice Chair Christina Arriaga. Thank Christina, along with all the commissioners, for inviting me to join you here today. Gail made sure that it was on my calendar many weeks ago, and making sure that no one changed. That's always a challenge in our scheduling. I'd also like to commend your Executive Director, Erin, and I asked Erin to make sure I pronounce it properly. Singh Shinsu. I get it right? For her tireless work to support the mission and organization this is. The very first line and very first amendment to our Constitution protects our religious freedom. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. When you think about that, it really says it all. It tells who we are. If there's anything in our founding fathers' thought process, was that this should be absolutely non-partisan. No partisanship whatsoever in religion protection, religion freedom, and support. Our founding fathers understood that the free exercise of faith is not just important to the health and well-being of individual people, it's the very foundation of a healthy democracy. When you give any institution or government the power to tell its people what to believe and how to believe it, you're telling people that their voice, their beliefs, and their values don't really matter. This country is the greatest country on earth and the hope of the world because we recognize our diversity and we embrace it. As a Christian, I am proud to share spiritual passions and inspiring words with my friends and Republicans and Democrats. Although I know that what speaks to my faith may not speak to others in the same way. But we do share back and forth experiences that we enjoy. Sometimes you're at a meeting and there might be something said and it's inspiring. And you want to share that because other people might not have had the opportunity to be there. So we send notes back and forth. On the Senate side, there's only 100 of us. The House side, God bless you all, 435. I don't know how you all navigate it, but I'm proud of you for what you do. I think it's important to have our dialogue, what we do. I think it's important to talk to each other about our faith and about why we care and about what we care about. I've always said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. My grandmother, I'll tell you where that comes from. One time, I was the first in our family to attend college, or finish college, let's put it that way. And I was so proud of what I was learning. My grandmother she immigrated from Italy, and she had a fourth grade education, but she was the most brilliant woman I've ever met. And she was so full of common sense. One time I came home, and I was just bursting at how much I learned. I just took accounting classes, I was in marketing, I was just learning all these new things. And I was just throwing a whole load of hay off. You come from the country, you thought you throw a whole load of hay off the horse, you're going to kill the horse. So I threw the whole load of hay off of what I learned. She looked at me and never batted an eye. She said, "Honey, remember, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And it really has to be here, not just here. And I never forgot those words. And for me, talking about my faith and listening to others talk about theirs is an important way of expressing that. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and a former member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I long believe that in addition to needing to maintain our dominance as the greatest military power in the world, we must also maintain our dominance as the greatest diplomatic power in the world. I've always said the superpower of the world is more than just having super might. Military might takes an awful lot more than that. And that's what you all do, truly holding us together. Since Gail began serving on this commission, I've been blown away, truly blown away by the powerful personal connection she's been able to make with strangers halfway around the world. But it's bigger than that. These individuals that you talk with and fight to protect can and do grab international attention because of the work you do. The release of Pastor Andrew Brunson from Turkey last year would not have happened without the tireless work of the people in this room here today. Neither would have the release of Abdul Shakur from Pakistan, another religious prisoner of conscience, who was freed last month thanks to the work of Commissioner Johnny Moore. Johnny, thank you for your tireless effort there. And the whole USCIRF committee and team. While there is plenty on which we can agree to disagree here in Washington, this gathering today should remind us all that there is much more on which we agree than what we disagree. We're all Americans first. We're not Democrats or Republicans. If you want to belong to a tribe, belong to the American tribe. It's a tribe that will continue on. We're all agree that religious freedom is a universal human right. It's one that we take for granted. Children in school today, and when I was going to school, we had prayer in school and never heard any of us. And I know it's a whole different world than what I grew up in, but a moment of silence, recognizing there's some power greater and higher than any of us that's able to lead us in times, good times and bad. And we all agree that we have a responsibility to protect and promote that right around the world for all people of all faiths, wherever they may live and wherever they may choose to believe. I get frustrated with this place sometimes. I think you've heard me speak out many times about it, because I know we're better than this. We're not showing as well as we are. We're not the country that we have been and that we can be at times when we show our differences and we allow the tribes to divide us. The wedge issues that come up, I think sometimes are intentional, sometimes maybe not intentional, but they do put us in a position where we don't show the strengths of America. We get sucked into the us versus them, what tribe we belong to, tribalism that makes it impossible to do the things that we all want to do. Fix our roads, healthcare, more affordable, education, opportunities, but most important, international religious freedoms. I say this because your voice is an important part of the discussion around here today. This organization needs to be reauthorized this year, and we need to do it in a bipartisan way, all speaking from the same unit. And it's an opportunity to bring folks together in a bipartisan way around the bipartisan goal in which we all agree. One recommendation I would make for the organization We have Reverend Barry Black, who's well-renowned in the Senate. On the House side, we have I think it's Father Patrick Conroy. Those two would be, I think, very helpful at times for you all to lean on a little bit and bring them into what you're doing, understanding your mission and what your purpose is. A lot of times, those of us in the House and the Senate aren't directly involved or indirectly involved, might not know the great works that you all are doing every day. And why it's so important to reauthorize, why it should not be a political football and playing games with this. This is important for all of us. I applaud the commissioners and the USCIRF staff for the outreach that they have done to date to try to accomplish that goal. And I encourage everyone to keep heart, not lose faith, and keep doing the work that needs to be done to get the bipartisan support we need to reauthorize this important commission. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that those on the appropriations committee, which I sat on, understand the mission that you serve. I always say that if you can count your blessings, you can share your blessings. Any one of us today in this room can count on blessings. I think we have to all dig deep that we share it with anybody else, those who are less fortunate. And that's what my grandmother, Mama Kay, called faith in action. She used to stop every time we saw someone. When I was little and walking with her all the time, she would take me to places. We were raised Catholic. And if someone was crippled or she saw a child that was maybe challenged, she'd make us stop and say a prayer. She said, by the grace of God, it could be you. And she opened her eye. She made us always aware of our position and our ability to help. We had a responsibility to our brothers and sisters to help them along their journey also. I look around the room and I see a lot of people that put their faith to work every day, and I thank you for the work that you're doing and will continue to do. So I want to say to all of you, God bless you. God bless the work that you're doing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Manchin. Next, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, and my thanks to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, for the invitation to join you all this morning. I'm sitting here and realizing that this is kind of an amazing moment here in Washington, because I just listened to my very moderate friend from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, open up. In a little while, you're going to hear from my very conservative friend from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, talk about how important this issue is, and now you're going to hear from the very liberal congressman from Massachusetts, me. But we're all united in our belief that we need to uphold religious freedoms all over the world. There are some things, even in Washington, that bring us together, and this is one of them. As my father used to say, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And this is something we all agree on, and we all feel very passionately about. You know, as a practicing Catholic who has long been concerned about the human rights of religious and ethnic minorities around the world, I welcome the newest USCIRF annual report. You know, Senator mentioned this, I'm going to mention it again because it's worth us remembering this. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The First Amendment is the basis of our country's long and proud tradition of freedom of religion. In many ways, it is the First Amendment that first defined us as a nation and set out the basic rights and freedoms of which Americans are most proud. That same tradition informed the drafting of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which affirms that everyone the world over has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Now, USCIRF's work helps those of us in Congress in our efforts to promote and defend the fundamental right to believe in accordance with one's own conscience and to express those beliefs however one sees fit. This right is often at the heart of the struggles of so many peoples who, due to the vagaries of history and geography, have ended up as minorities in inhospitable lands. Tibetans and Uyghurs in China, Rohingya Muslims in Burma, Ahmadiyas in Pakistan, Christians in Egypt and Sudan, to mention only a few examples. Each year, USCIRF's annual report pulls together information on many of these struggles. It provides a snapshot of trends in the state of religious freedom around the world and identifies the countries where that freedom is most at risk. Along with many of my congressional colleagues, I rely on the annual report and its recommendations as a starting point when thinking about what more our government can do to protect freedom of conscience and belief around the world. I also appreciate the way USCIRF builds on its annual reports by delving more deeply into the trends and problems it identifies. For example, the 2017 USCIRF report on the widespread misuse of blasphemy laws to penalize freedom of expression with grossly excessive punishments, up to and including the death penalty, was a truly important contribution to the debate about religious freedom. And I would say the same about USCIRF's report on women and religious freedom, which strongly countered the mistaken view that freedom of religion is incompatible with women's rights to equality. So these kinds of analyses are so important because they remind us of the power of freedom of religion to contribute to a life well and fully lived. Religion should not be an instrument of repression or be used to justify hate. Rather, religion should guide us toward embracing our shared humanity. So I also appreciate USCIRF's willingness to call out egregious violations of human rights as they happen, like the attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday and the mass execution last week of 37 Saudi nationals, a majority of whom were Shia Muslims. You know, and we also need to pay attention to the challenges of religious freedom here in the United States. We saw just recently another terrible tragedy, another attack on a synagogue in Poway, California. Anti-Semitism is still a problem in this country, as is Islamophobia. We see hate crimes all over this country, attacks on Christian churches. So we all have to speak up and we all have to be vigilant. This is important. And finally, I just want to thank USCIRF for working with us. I co-chair the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. As you know, Tom Lantos was the only Holocaust survivor who served in Congress, and we have a Human Rights Commission named after him in his honor. But we work together on a Prisoners of Conscience campaign, where members of Congress adopt a prisoner of conscience, oftentimes who are in prison because of their religion or because they want to practice their religion. And we need to continue to be voice to those people who are defending human rights in their countries. So let me close again by congratulating USCIRF on the launch of the new annual report and by saying how much I look forward to continuing to work together on behalf of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion around the world. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Representative McGovern. Next is North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows, Chair of the House Freedom Caucus.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. I want to just say thank you to every commissioner here, not only for this report, but for your continued work on behalf of what you've now heard a senator, a liberal congressman. There are not too many congressmen to my right. You've got the full spectrum, but it's really your report, but more importantly, your advocacy each and every day that makes a difference in the lives of individuals that we get to see up close and personal. And so it's critical that Congress comes behind you, supports you in a long-term way to make sure that this commission not only continues its work now, but continues it for decades to come. And you can count on my support. I see my good friend, Congressman Frank Wolf. There has been no one who has been a greater advocate for this religious freedom issue than Frank Wolf. We miss you. We thank you. I want to keep my remarks very brief because many times what we take for granted in the United States, other nations do not take for granted. It is very easy for me in Western North Carolina to not only worship as I please, but to be able to go beyond that and exercise my faith as I am convicted to believe. And there is a difference, and I want to make sure that we highlight the difference of those two, because so many times we say it's okay to worship one way, but just don't take it beyond what you do on this particular day in this particular venue. And it is this commission that has been willing to stand up on behalf of those who do not have a voice, to make sure that that message gets taken, not just from the halls of Congress, but that it is a priority for Americans broadly, from coast to coast, from Maine to California, from Montana to Florida, and in between, that it is important that religious liberty is the hallmark of who we are. And no one understands that probably better than me. In the rotunda of this very building is a portrait. It's called the Embarkation, and on there is an individual on the deck of a ship that has a Bible that is open, and we know that story pretty well because they were coming from Holland because of religious persecution, to hopefully be able to not only worship as they please, but exercise their faith as they please. And on the deck of that ship with a Bible open is a particular individual by the name of William Brewster, Elder William Brewster. Now, when he came, he had no idea that his portrait would be on the very walls of perhaps the most powerful place on the face of the globe. In fact, he was coming to a place only to exercise what he believed his God had called him to do. Now, I share that story because he didn't believe that his portrait would be there, but he also didn't believe that his 11th great-grandson would be serving in Congress, because he's my 11th great-grandfather. And so to understand who we are and to tell the rest of the story, how many other William Brewsters are out there in other countries willing to sacrifice it all for their faith and their religion? This commission has come alongside many of them. I've had the opportunity to work with a few of the commissioners here where we've actually seen unbelievable things happen. And I've been able to, in a very small part, see the behind the scenes of people that are truly unchained. I think of Miriam Ibrahim and what was happening in Sudan, and knowing that Tony Perkins and I were able to work very closely together. I was a freshman member of Congress at that particular time. My wife kept elbowing me and said, "Mark, you got to do something. This is terrible." And I said, "Well, who am I?" And I guess the question goes out to all of you. Who are you? You're one person with a passion, willing to do something perhaps for someone who cannot speak for themselves. So I want to encourage you in that, because we know the rest of the story with Miriam, because indeed chained to a floor in Sudan, that I got to hold her baby here in the United States of America. There's not a better story than that. And yet it doesn't stop there. The senator mentioned Andrew Brunson. Andrew Brunson happens to be from Western North Carolina. I drive by where they're from each and every day, and it brings it up close and personal to those that we have the ability to serve with. And when we see that up close and personal, we cannot believe that other countries do not enjoy the same freedoms. We assume that they serve in a free society much like us, unless there is someone willing to speak up. This commission has done this time and time again. It is critical for members of Congress to see the work that you do, because with your work, what happens is it starts to highlight. We have a number of priorities each and every day, and as the congressman from Massachusetts would say, many things that could divide us, but this brings us together. So let this message be clear for all those who are listening today or viewing this. We are united in our resolve to make sure that religious persecution does not happen not only in America but across the globe. You will find the left and the right coming together, and with your help, God willing, will make a big difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman Mills. I'd like to begin with some questions about the report. First one for Commissioner Gary Bauer. The cover of your report highlights the suffering of Uyghur and other Muslims at the hands of the Chinese government. That's Great. All right, let's go to you to give an opening statement, please, Commissioner.
Good morning, everyone, and I would thank Senator Manchin and Representative McGovern and Representative members for your presence and supportive remarks. And I also like to acknowledge the presence of Congressman Frank Wolf. We deeply appreciate the work and your presence here today. I want to acknowledge the presence of our former Ambassador at Large, Davis, Stein over there. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm Nancy Doherty, Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. We at USCIRF are passionate about the importance of international religious freedom, which is foundational and fundamental human right. This year, we're issuing our 20th annual report, which will give you a snapshot of where religious freedom is in peril and what can be done about it. Last year was also the 20th anniversary of the passage of International Religious Freedom Act, the legislation that created USCIRF. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are an independent, bipartisan U.S. government commission dedicated to promoting the universal right to freedom of religion or belief around the world. Throughout the year, we monitor religious freedom conditions abroad, including through frequent travel. Under our mandate and purpose, we issue a report by May 1st each year with recommendations to the President, Federal, State, and Congress on how to promote religious freedom around the globe. This year, our report covers 38 countries, though we focus on the worst countries in the world for religious freedom. We highlight improvements in those places as well, where appropriate, and we certainly saw some positive movement in some countries last year. You can see the full report on our website at USCIRF.gov, and copies are available on the tables on either side. Before I describe it more further, I must say that USCIRF, we are blessed with outstanding staff, and so my special thanks to the entire staff for putting this wonderful report together at this event. I would also like to thank Jamie Harvey, Amanda Green of the Government Publishing Office in Design Shop, Ellen Morgan, our copy editor, and Emily Bonner, and the counselors at Cetra Language Solutions. The entire team's focus, coordination, and dedication made today possible. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. The report groups countries into two categories of tiers. Our country's tier status is decided by a majority board commissioners. Tier 1 is the group of countries USCIRF is recommending to the State Department for designation as countries of particular concern, or CPCs. This is a category in URFA for governments that engage in tolerate, I quote, systematic, ongoing, and egregious, unquote, violations of religious freedom. 16 countries are on Tier 1 this year, and this includes 10 countries the State Department has designated as CPCs, most recently in November last year. And the names are listed in the reports. I'm not going to go through the list. The State Department named Pakistan as CPC for the first time ever last year, an improvement and long-needed step that we welcome. In addition, USCIRF believes the 6th merit CPC designation, the Central African Republic, Nigeria, Russia, Syria, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Tier 2 is for countries where we find that the violations may one or two, but not all three of the systematic ongoing immigration steps for CPC status. 12 countries on the list, and these are in our report. My colleagues and I will discuss some of the USCIRF key findings and recommendations on some of the countries in more detail this morning. Please let me start first with China. The cover of our report this year tells the story of appalling abuses against Uyghur Muslims in China. Last year, the government of China has been especially pernicious toward religion or religious believers, particularly Tibetan Buddhists, Christian, Falun Gong practitioners, and Muslims. China was one of the 3 countries that will primarily focus on the USCIRF's first annual report in 2000. In that first report, USCIRF found that Uyghur Muslims face heightened repression of their religious and other human rights, were subject to arbitrary arrest, torture, and extrajudicial executions, and very prison for the with association of practice. Now, nearly 20 years later, as Muslim in China, particularly an ethnic Uyghur Muslim, you may be forcibly sent to a detention camp, subjected to unspeakable acts of abuse, alleged torture, and pressure to abandon your faith. Uyghur Muslims are constantly surveilled, their phones confiscated, scanned, their DNA collected, their children forfeited for attending mosques. The Chinese government has forcibly interned between 800,000 and 2 million adults in detention camps and relegated some of their children to orphanages. The U.S. government and international community must swiftly and resolutely sanction Chinese officials and agencies that have perpetrated and tolerated civil religious freedom violations. The United States must press the Chinese government immediately and unconditionally set Uyghur and other Muslims free from the internment camp and also release other prisoners of conscience. Last year and this year also, we also continue to make religious business of conscience one of our top priorities. As a part of religious business of conscience or RPOC project, I have adopted a Dalai Lama, who has been dismissed by the Chinese government since 1995 and who turned 30 years old last week, February 25th, and I issued an open letter. And his Bulgarian demon, a Uyghur Muslim woman unjustly serving a life prison in China, life prison in China. Currently, we have 13 RPOCs in the project. We have seen the release of some RPOCs, including last year. Last year and this year, we also work to fulfill this mandate given us by Frankfurt Act. We now have a database platform and are gathering cases to populate the database. I would now like to turn to my colleagues, Vice Chair Christina Arriaga, who will talk about some of our overarching recommendations and issue among state actors and countries to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It has been mentioned many times this morning, the wonderful thing that is to be bipartisan and to be in a group of commissioners where we passionately agree about almost everything outside of this room and outside of the commission room. But once we're in the commission room, we draft a report in the spirit of consensus building and with laser-like precision and attention on the issue of religious freedom. It's truly an honor to serve with my colleagues, and I will keep my remarks very short so you can all have time to ask them questions. One of the greatest moments I have had at the commission, and there have been many, was when I was with my colleague, the first Tibetan Buddhist to be appointed to the commission, Tenzin Dorji in Iraq, and after they issued our helmet and our flag jacket, I told him I'm a little concerned because you get to come back, I don't. However, he assured me that our karma brought us together, so we would both come, whether I believed it or not. And that was a very enriching moment in the commission. We have all had similar conversations. A couple of my Baptist colleagues have tried to save me, I won't mention who. But isn't it wonderful that we live in a country and we are in a place where we won't get arrested on our way out of here simply because we're making our statements like many other countries that we monitor. So a few very short points. One is our report indicates there has indeed been a tremendous deterioration in many countries when it comes to religious freedom. But we don't take that line down. We're a commission that has powerful policy recommendations. We remind Congress, the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Commerce, that Congress has given us powerful tools in our legislation and powerful tools through the Global Magnitsky Act and through the through our own legislation, which allows us to use targeted measures and sanctions against individuals who have violated the religious freedom of many in their own country. Second, we want to make the point that the world is changing. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom report is not only looking at countries. It used to be, when we first established, countries have boundaries, and they were contained within those boundaries. Unfortunately, terrorist organizations all over the world have expanded and have formed countries that extend boundaries. So we also identified a number of entities of particular concern We have a different number in the Department of State. I'll let you read the report. I'll let you ask State Department why we differ on those numbers. Their definition is somewhat different. But the point is we're all united in identifying that this problem of religious freedom goes beyond the borders of many countries. Finally, this coming July, we're going to have the second ministerial. Last year was the first time since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted that there was a group of countries that got together to discuss at the minister level one issue and one issue alone, and that is religious freedom. We're encouraged that the administration is going to hold another ministerial in July, and to further emphasize the prioritization of religious freedom that the Trump administration has taken on, we would like to encourage the administration to appoint a special advisor to the President on International Religious Freedom to the National Security Council. This was envisioned by the USCIRF bill that created our legislation and was reaffirmed with a Franco Act, but it has not been done by any president. Finally, to speak briefly about the Religious Prisoners of Conscience program, you will see in our appendix that many of us commissioners, all of us commissioners, have adopted a certain number of people to live their stories and illustrate the story and to become a voice for people that do not have a voice. Commissioner Moore's Prisoner of Conscience, which was released this year, was mentioned by Senator Manchin. We also, of course, have the great story of Pastor Andrew Brunson, where many people were involved in his release. But unfortunately, there's still people in prison. Ivan Levitsky, a Scientologist in Russia, Dennis Christensen, a Jehovah's Witness. Members of the Church of Almighty God in China are facing increased repression. And also Taekwondo in Vietnam. Even though he has been released, he continues to be under state surveillance. And finally, I cannot finish these remarks without mentioning my homeland, Cuba. My parents stayed in Los Gatos, Cuba, to live according to their deeply held religious convictions. The situation in Cuba has deteriorated dramatically this last year. Just last week, there were 2 Christian pastors whose only crime was to want to raise their children according to their religion. And both of them were detained and imprisoned. It seems like they will each be sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. And a Christian lawyer who just came to attend the trial, just to attend it, to watch what was going on, was beaten severely. All the fingers in his right hand were broken, and he is suffering deafness in one ear just because he wanted to see what was going on. I would like to finish by thanking my fellow commissioners and by passing on the baton to fellow Commissioner and Vice Chairwoman Manchin. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Arriaga. Unfortunately, China, Pakistan, and some of the countries that had been mentioned earlier are only a few of the several countries where freedom of religion or belief remained in peril through 2018. Some governments suppressed religious freedom under the guise of public order, national security, frequently invoking either real or perceived to be real threats that they feel justified that repression. Others brand religious and ethnic minorities as extremists, in part because these groups believe that they are working under a foreign influence. In several countries where USCIRF found deteriorating religious freedom conditions, it also found increased secularization and politicizing of religion. Religion and politics continually start to connect and interconnect, and sometimes that is intentional by those who seek to discriminate against minorities or to restrict their rights of certain religious communities. And the very governments that perpetuate and tolerate these abuses often cry internal, that we're restricting internal affairs. And so USCIRF has to be very careful in rightfully admonishing and separating truly deplorable religious freedom and human rights restrictions. In 2018, both state and non-state actors increasingly used religion as a tool to isolate, marginalize, and punish others through discrimination and violence. However, despite all these negative trends in the world today, there are some positive developments, such as Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Egypt, and Kazakhstan. And I have told them that these governments are willing to engage with international stakeholders and take some actions to improve the conditions of their country. And I tell them that even living in a bad neighborhood where they come from, they are trying to stand up for what is right, even though there is still work to be done. And even in two countries that we still recommend to be a country of particular concern, Saudi Arabia and Uzbekistan, we saw continued and sustained efforts by those governments to engage on some ongoing concepts that we are working through with these countries. Another very positive note is the release of another religious political prisoner of conscience, one whom I happen to have been advocating for, Muhammad Ali Tahiri, a cognitive researcher and founder of a spiritual group in Iran. He has been imprisoned for his beliefs since 2011 under various charges and sentences, including twice having been sentenced to death. We obviously were thrilled to learn just last week that he has been released. We believe that by heightening the awareness of these types of imprisonments, raises the scrutiny and improves chances of a release around the world. Let me conclude by emphasizing what makes our annual report unique and of significant value to the many stakeholders in government and civil society. USCIRF's annual reports and, more importantly, USCIRF's mandate from Congress are different from, but certainly complementary to the State Department and their annual report on international religious freedom. First of all, the State Department writes on every country in the world except the United States. USCIRF's annual report is focused on fewer than 30 countries, and typically those are the ones that are most problematic in religious freedom violations. So that's a very important point. Second, USCIRF's annual report unflinchingly describes violations of international religious freedom, our mandate, whereas the State Department must account for overall bilateral relationships in reporting. USCIRF has the independence and the objectivity to call out these violations more bluntly and articulately. Third, USCIRF's reports, unlike the State Department, analyze U.S. policy with respect to international religious freedom, remember, our focus, our mandate, and make extensive policy recommendations both to the executive branch of government and to Congress. Over our 20-year existence, USCIRF's recommendations through research, personal interaction within visits to these countries, and also here in Washington, have impacted U.S. policy and helped to improve the implementation of IRFA, particularly in ensuring that the State Department designates the worst violators as CPCs. In addition, Congress has incorporated a number, as we heard from those who spoke this morning, a number of our recommendations to make U.S. religious freedom promotion abroad more effective under the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act of 2016. I thank you for the opportunity to serve on this commission. I am proud to represent the United States, the one country that goes and looks and helps and tries to advocate for religious freedom violations anywhere in this world. It is an honor to be here and to serve in this position, and I thank you, and I now return to our moderator, Laura.
Thank you so much. We are running a little behind schedule, so I will ask two questions of commissioners today and then open it up to the audience. And now it is time for you, Mr. Bauer. The cover of the report highlights the Uyghur Muslims and their plight at the hands of the Chinese government. Religious freedom seems to be deteriorating right before our eyes in front of us in China. And the U.S. and China are on the cusp of a major trade agreement. So what should the U.S. government be doing to address these atrocities?
Well, as has been said several times this morning, we have a Tier 1 and Tier 2 of the countries we look at. If we were going to rate the Tier 1 countries, China would be in a category all by itself. In the level of persecution, they are an equal opportunity persecutor. They go after anybody of any faith that might compete with the communist, atheistic government of China for the loyalty of its citizens. So it's deeply disturbing to see that some of the countries in our report are not countries of great influence. China is an expanding power. It's a country getting more and more powerful by the year. To have a country with these ideas and this degree of persecution ought to be something that scares everyone. We designated them as a Tier 1 country now for 20 years in a row. And the situation is getting worse. So we make a number of recommendations. One of them is that in all the negotiations between the United States and China on bilateral issues, particularly on the ongoing trade debates or negotiations going on now, all that is very important, but religious persecution specifically, and more broadly human rights, ought to be a factor on the table in addition to tariffs and other related issues. And we are continuing to push that idea, and many of the commissioners are working with the administration every chance we get to remind them that it's not just tariffs and jobs, as important as that is, but it's also this basic idea of the right of every man and woman, whether they're in China or wherever they are, to seek God and worship God as they see fit. We're also asking this year for specific targeting of individuals. We know the names of people in China that are working for the government, that are engaged in this persecution, whether it's the Muslim Uyghurs or the Falun Gong or Christians or Tibetan Buddhists. We need to call them out by name. We need to do everything we can to shame them. We also say, very gently, I think, that we want to work with U.S. businesses. We want the U.S. government to work with U.S. businesses to help them do more on this issue. I'd like to be a little bit more specific. Trade with China was supposed to change China. It ended up that trade with China ended up changing America as more and more corporations became dependent on the goodwill of the Chinese government. So I will personally say, shame on you if you are a U.S. corporation and you are forgetting the first part of the description of you. You are a U.S. corporation. You are a corporation founded in a country that was built on religious liberty. How dare you make a separate peace with the Chinese government in order to advance your financial interests? So we want to keep the pressure. We hope the U.S. government will keep the pressure on U.S. businesses so that they will stand for the values of the country that allow them to be successful to begin with.
realize that in this report, Sri Lanka is not covered. But you issued a statement condemning the Easter bombings that killed more than 300 people and injured 500. The Sri Lankan authorities were tipped off earlier, April 9th, April 11th. International organizations were telling them something was going to happen. What kinds of things should that government and other governments just like it in chaos do to prevent these kinds of barbaric attacks?
Thank you, Lauren. As you mentioned, that's not a country we cover, but the Easter attacks in Sri Lanka, as the recent attacks on the mosque in Christchurch and New Zealand, these are horrific, absolutely horrific. And of all places, regardless of your faith, where you go to worship, you should be safe. And we saw this trend increasing across the countries that we do observe, that increasingly houses of worship, because they're soft targets, are being targeted by terrorists and others. There were a few of us commissioners that were in Egypt for the opening of the Coptic church. Just prior to that, there was a bomb tech trying to dismantle a bomb the day before at another Coptic church that was killed in trying to disarm and render safe the device. It happened that that particular bomb tech had been trained by the U.S. Department of State's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, a program that I used to work with as a contractor. We have some wonderful men and women who are serving in our government, helping these foreign governments to create safe places over what has historically been vital installations, power plants, government facilities. But where we saw a glaring need was houses of worship, as they have now become targets of terrorists. And so one of our specific recommendations to the Department of State and the Department of Defense is to create and establish programs that would work with foreign governments to provide training and equipment, if necessary, to these houses of worship to secure them. Unfortunately, it's becoming an industry here in the United States, as we well know. And with a law enforcement background myself, I understand the importance of working with law enforcement to work with the officials in the various houses of worship to secure those sites. And this is a strong recommendation that we make to this administration to pursue this quickly so that people of all faiths can go to their houses of worship and do so in safety and security.
Thank you so much, Tony Perkins. We'd like to open it up to questions. If you would raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone up to you. Right here in the front row.
Thank you for holding this, and I know there's a lot of issues, but could you, I'm going to start with Breitbart News heavily. Could you say, if you were telling the Trump administration, the State Department, what should be their top priority right now given what's going on?
Why don't we go with you, Christine? Or, okay.
I think they should continue to do what they're doing, which is to bring this issue to the forefront. It continues to be a priority for our government that, when we're interacting with countries, I know that the state, we're fortunate that we serve in that, as Christina pointed out, we look at our report of religious freedom, laser focused, and only on religious freedom. I know the administration has to look at a lot of different topics when they're making decisions, but to continue to make religious freedom at the top and to work that into all of their negotiations with countries is, I think, one of our strongest recommendations.
Thank you so much. Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Hi, Shihab Ratansi from Al Jazeera English. The Vice Chair mentioned Saudi Arabia, and certainly there's changing rhetoric when it comes to religious freedom there. As your report makes clear, Saudi Arabia is the intense violator of religious freedom. Congressman McGovern mentioned the execution last week of 37 people, mainly Shia. Is it time for forceful action against Saudi Arabia finally? Commissioner Bauer was talking with regards to China about specific targeting of individuals, working with US businesses who seem to be getting more about money than religious freedom? Is it time for action like that with Saudi Arabia, or should the US continue to give the kingdom a pass?
Commissioner Moore?
One of the unique parts of this report that you have in your hands, which hasn't been mentioned here, is that the URFA legislation makes it explicitly clear that individual commissioners are to have the opportunity to express individual points of view on every issue and on every country. And in fact, in the reports that you have, there are several places at the end of the reports where you have individual comments on many countries. I think I contributed 5 or 6. There's several others here. The reason why that exists is because there's a majority opinion on certain issues, but there also is an expertise on this panel of commissioners that looks at the nuance of all of these issues. And so, as has been stated here before, the Commission released a press statement last week that was very, very clear on the most recent incident. But it is also true in Saudi Arabia that there are positive developments that are taking place on a parallel track. And what this Commission is focused on is exploring both and at the same time, not either or. In our visit to the kingdom this year, when you sit down and you talk about the efforts to reform the kingdom, everyone talks very openly about key performance indicators, right? The KPIs. So on the basis of the KPIs, unquestionably, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is one of the most egregious offenders of religious liberty. That's why it's a CPC. And so we, as the USCIRF Commission, with regard to this country or any country in the world, our eyes are going to roam the world, and when people suffer in darkness, we're going to raise our point of view, and we're going to condemn that. And that's what we do. On the same token, we're going to engage, with the positive effects that are happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. For the first time ever, this commission was allowed to meet with the religious police. That had never happened before. The Minister of Islamic Affairs was clear to us in a meeting that Saudi Arabia is not a kingdom anymore where there can only be one religion. It's a kingdom where there are lots of different things happening, some things that are the worst in the world, and on the same token there's a glimmer of light, and we're trying to do what we can to shimmy open that door. And you're going to see that level of nuance in this report as you go throughout it. It's a report that talks about the terrible suffering of religious minorities in certain parts of Egypt, but it also acknowledges that the Grand Imam at Al-Azhar, has now said openly that the Baha'i and other religious communities, including the Jehovah's Witnesses, deserve the right to have their own places of worship in the country. It's a report that acknowledges that the Kingdom of Bahrain, still has problems when it comes to the Shiite minority in the country. It is also a kingdom that has engaged with members of Congress and this commission at an incredibly constructive level. And one of the reasons why some of those actions have taken place is because of direct engagement. So I say all that to say, this is not a political commission. This is a commission that we call a spade, and we give credit where credit is due at the same time. And we will not be pulled into political disagreements as we do so.
I wanted to just add real quick to answer that is the commission did put out a statement a few days ago condemning the execution of the Shia Muslims and asking the government to lift the waiver that is giving Saudi Arabia a pass for these egregious religious freedom violations.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to take one more question. The gentleman in the front.
Sufi Lagari with the Sindhi Foundation. I'm sure you must know that in Pakistan, the Sindh province, more than 1,000 girls, 10 to 12 years, forced conversion, forced marriages. Not only the Sindhi Hindu girls, but Shias, Hazaras, and even Sufis attacked by Islamic extremists. And in these all countries, Pakistan is the only country who received the more aid from the United States of America. I think this report just not enough for to accountability to the Pakistani military and the ISI. I want to hear from you what act we have to take against Pakistan to, especially those girls, And recently, one guy is called Mia Bittu. I really highly recommend that he must be treated as a terrorist. To the Hindu girls, it's not I'm talking, Pakistani Human Rights Commission is talking, even in your own report.
Thank you so much. That would be you, Commissioner Moore. Or Bhargava.
Thank you for the question. So I think in a number of the country reports, including Pakistan, which is a CPC country, for the reasons that you have raised and for many others, one of the things that we're really trying to focus on is the ways in which women and children have been a focal point of violence and persecution on basis of religious freedom and otherwise. And so you will see throughout these reports, stemming from our independent report on women and religious freedom, we really do try to highlight the ways in which we see girls, the ways in which we see women being a focal point of violence, and how do we actually try and figure out how that not only gets highlighted and explored and investigated, but also that countries are held to account. And so I think your question, I think it's something that we as commissioners collectively are very concerned about, and it's something that we have noted in reports throughout the world.
Thank you so much. We've reached the end of our time today. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the USCIRF commissioners and staff for a great report and event. USCIRF has also asked me to thank the following members of the media for your interest in covering this, the NGOs who participate in the IRL Roundtable for your commitment to international religious freedom, congressional staff as well. If you have follow-up questions for the commissioners and staff, please contact Kelly Boyle. Anyone else with follow-up questions, please contact Elizabeth Cassidy, USCIRF.gov. Thank you.
Is your phone?
No, that's Henry's.
Okay.